Good evening and welcome to Insight Tonight. My name is Victor Moyakane if you're joining us right now. Tonight we want to talk about climate change. It's a subject that's big, it's a buzzword right now, but there's a lot that still remains unknown, undiscussed, untold. And tonight I'm joined by two ladies, experts in their own right, full of insight and perspective, who are going to help us to at least tackle small part of this conversation. We only have half an hour. It's not going to be enough to cover a topic of this magnitude, but we do have wonderful people here who are going to help us to at least make an attempt to do that. To my immediate left is someone they call the Green MP, and I hope you achieve your dream, Anita Soina, correct?
Yes.
She's from the Maasai community, and beyond just representing that community on the local and global scale, she's also an environmentalist by passion. Yes. I like that. And she likes to champion matters around water and access to that and forestry as well, and trees. Mm-hmm. Good job. Good job that you're doing.
Thank you.
We also have Josephine Wawira. You are a communications expert, but you're passionate about sustainability, and you also have a lot of insight around the circular economy. We appreciate you for coming. Thank you for joining us. Ladies, let's look at this thing from a different perspective. I want you to tell me from where you sit. We'll start with you, Anita. What is the problem currently with how we are dealing with climate change? From where you sit. You've been active in this space.
Yeah.
What do you see is going wrong?
Okay. From where I sit, I would say there's lack of political goodwill from across the world, where we really are transitioning well when it comes to words, but then we don't really see the actions being put, and we don't see actions well enough to be able to see that we are really keen on combating climate change. I say so because I have been in the space, like you said, by passion and not by profession. So I am in the space to learn. But then I've realized that when you educate the community and tell them what they need to do, then it is not as hard as convincing leaders to put policies in place that can. Yes.
Tell us why.
The reason being, right now you realize that the effects of climate change are very evident. It's not as long ago where you had to convince someone and tell them that, we need to start being environmentally conscious and practicing this and this for us to take care of the environment. But right now, with the current effect, for example, in my community, it's not even a story. It's things that we can see. So it's easy to actually convince the communities to be able to contribute to climate action or to be able to shift the practices. Let's see, from the news that you were covering, you saw that in Marsabit, they are now transitioning to agriculture. That shows that the community can. The young people as well, who are said to be the leaders of today, you can see that we have so many voices from the young people. Young people are no longer saying that we want to be heard, but they're saying, I am coming to the table because these are the solutions that we have to climate crisis. So to me, my problem still remains lack of political goodwill, and that's why I went for that seat.
Oh, is that so?
Yes, yes.
It changed from within?
From within the corridors of power.
Trojan horse type of thing.
Yes.
Josephine, from where you sit, where are we getting it wrong?
I think first of all is to admit that, like she said, the effects are very clear right now. And unfortunately, we are still dealing with a lot of jargons. We are still dealing with a very big picture like climate change for some of these people, some of the communities, even some of us in the industries, is something that is affecting other people. All right. So bringing it home, and I'm glad to see stories like what you have done, because that now brings out the perspective of how is climate change affecting people on a day-to-day basis. How is the farmer losing crop yields because of prolonged droughts or rainfall, and how can they be able to adapt to climate change impacts? For instance, I'll give you a story in South Sudan, right, where a certain village was farming maize and millet and sorghum. However, changes in climate meant that their farms now are flooded. Their fields now full of water. Right. The possibility here of going into despair is very high. But because of that sensitization and awareness creation from people who know better, people like us having a conversation right now, people moving from having the talk and going to the ground to help communities adapt and become more resilient, this village is now transitioning to rice farming. So instead of going into despair, they have found a better way of making better use of the water now. And so understanding and helping people understand, whether it is at a policy level, whether it is a business level, or at a community level, we must stop working in silos. We have to push for partnerships and collaboration. I'll give you another example of plastic waste, for instance, why I push for collaboration. So Kenya is very known for the implementation of the ban in plastic carrier bag back in 2017, which has been a huge success. However, challenges still are there because of the porous borders. For instance, we're having countries like Tanzania and Uganda who have not implemented the same. So if we move the same way that Kenya has gone, the same way Rwanda has gone, having that regional cooperation helps us to move that implementation to the next level. However, coming back to Kenya on a national level, making sure that we have, public-private partnerships. But for me, I push it a little bit further because I say public-private is not enough. We have to make sure that we have the public-private and community partnerships.
Right.
Yeah? PPCP.
Which is what Anita was talking
exactly.
about. And
so that,
just on that point of community, it seems to me, ladies, that in conversations around climate change, and you've touched on this, we're rushing towards wonderful policy, wonderful conferences with wonderful declarations, and we're forgetting one key component of all this, people. Can you tell us in what ways, and you can finish your point, help us to understand in what ways we are failing to include people, and in what ways are we going to lose out because of that?
I recently, and I like giving, because I'm a communications expert, I like simplifying this whole story.
Right.
And I recently, last month, was in Rwanda on the same mission to kind of understand what is working for them and what is not working for us. And the most surprising thing that I learned is that Rwanda is picking their policies, and especially on environmental issues, from Kenya.
Is that so?
Because Kenya is very good at putting in place, we are actually globally recognized for putting in place policy and regulations and legislations that support climate change mitigation, environmental protection, and all that. The only difference that there is, and I am not ashamed of saying this, is implementation. So moving from having that policy on paper to action. So like you're saying, even tomorrow I'll be hosting a forum, a roundtable that will be bringing together development partners, government, private sector, the youth in celebration or ahead of the Youth Day, but again bringing the conversation on sustainability, green jobs, and how we all can contribute. But even as we hold these conversations, even as the climate summit comes up in Kenya later in September, I believe, after we have these dialogues in rooms, in hotels, in conferences, we need and we must emphasize on the need of moving the step further, and those discussions that we have, those agreements that we sign, let's now go on the ground and let's implement them. But how to implement them is making sure, even at the policy formulation level, we don't put it at the top and then come and tell the people that this is what we have decided to do. Now you borrow to it or you leave it. It's involving the community from the get-go. So making sure that everybody is on the table is what for us is lacking.
Yeah, I like that. I like that point. And I want you to jump in on that point. Some of the solutions that have actually been put out in other parts of the world have actually been community initiated and community led and community implemented, and to great success. And can you tell us, for example, the community that you come from? In some of the work that you do, I've seen you've been involved in quite a lot of work on the grassroots level. What sort of solutions are coming from the community level that do not have the same sort of support from the leaders as yourself?
Yeah, I will start by saying that most of the times, like Shea has said, we have these discussions on the global level, for example. without having to consult and to understand from the community. You have not stayed with the community to understand where the shoe pinches. You have not sat down with them to understand that if you are going to ask them not to practice A and to shift to B, is that a good alternative for them? Are they in a position to even be able to shift from A to B? And for me, I think that is one of the huge problems that we've had, and that even comes to funding. Like you've said, we are going to have the Africa Climate Summit and so many other events, including the COP28. And then you realize it's so easy to fund such travels, but then it is not easy to fund communities and their own projects.
Right.
So you go back to the community, their projects, they could have projects that they understand could work for them, but then are we supporting them in the first place? No, but we are supporting other people to travel to conferences and speak and tell stories of other people. When we can have the same people tell their own stories, I think it starts from allowing the community to be able to communicate and to involve them from the very first step of the decision making. Otherwise, we will just, like they say, nothing for us without us. So if other people are going to sit
Say that
down,
again.
nothing for us without us. So as other people sit down somewhere and just think that community challenges are different. As you move from one community to another, they could be different. But then, like we say, Afrocentric solution, Eurocentric solutions may not work for Africa. Sometimes we need Afrocentric solutions. So same case to community level. How are we involving them right from the beginning,
Right.
so that we don't make the decisions for them and think that it is right for them?
I was looking. Thank you for that. I was looking at a list, an index made by the Notre Dame University. It's called the GAIN Index, and apparently it summarizes a country's vulnerability to climate change and other challenges, in combination with readiness to improve resilience. And in this list, I'm looking at 185 countries. The top 10 countries that are best placed to adapt and to do this are all doing community-based solutions. They're all putting people at the center of their interventions. The top 10 countries are also not in Africa. The top 20 countries are not in Africa. The top 50 countries are not in Africa. The first African country on that list is Tunisia at number 69, followed very closely by Morocco. And then there's no African country for a long time until you get to Africa in the red list, the bottom list. There's this word, Kitaturamba, right? Can you tell us how some of these Eurocentric, as you put it, let me come to you, these Eurocentric policies and solutions, help us to understand how they're actually doing more harm than good on the ground and what should be done about them?
So one of the most unfortunate facts is that Africa contributes least to global emissions, but Africa suffers the most. And I remember making this argument to a group of people, and they were not very clear on why is this the case, because I think from the beginning you asked the question, are climate change solutions that we are implementing today working?
Right.
And if not, why not? One thing that we must admit is that even in Africa, we are trying the best that we can to implement solutions that work, that will help us to become more resilient to climate change impacts. And yet, the effectiveness and long-term sustainability of these solutions are also impacted and based on other factors like technological advancements, innovations, all those other things that you find that some of the European countries are more advanced than Africa is in terms of implementing preparedness. Again, there is also this notion that we also, you see the way I've said and started with this statement that, these are the big contributors, so they need to take more responsibility for what they're doing. So bringing that back home and saying, fine, we are where we are, so how about homegrown solutions? Because like she said, what works for them may not work for us. And we cannot wait for always depending on international resolutions, international legislations. We need to come back, yes, benchmark, but when we come back home, let's find solutions that work for us. Whether it's at policy implementation or formulation level, let's not always, say this is working for Europe, so let's copy paste east and come and do it here. It's not going to work because the needs of the communities, the needs of the people, the needs of our county governments, the needs of everybody in Kenya is not the same as the need of the people in Rwanda, in Tanzania, in South Africa, in Nigeria, in Morocco, in Denmark, or in other countries. You understand? So understanding and that baseline information, baseline data, which is a very big challenge right now that we face. So knowing what works for us, what are the immediate community needs that we have today, what are the challenges that they face, and what works for them. Because I always like to say this, and I recently concluded on a project paper, and I was looking at how to empower African communities through communication strategies that help them to increase adaptation and resilience. And one of the realization that I came to admit, and I hope to help other people admit, is that climate change effects in Africa, they didn't start yesterday. Decades and centuries have seen communities deal with impacts, long periods of drought and rainfall. So how did they survive until now? So that means there are strategies that those communities have indigenously put in place. There is indigenous knowledge.
Away from conferences.
Exactly. That, there are strategies and methods that have worked for them for years, even without us coming to tell them what to do.
But are we tapping into that?
Exactly. So now we need to, that's why I'm saying, let's go to the ground and say, what has worked for you? How did you deal with these long droughts for all these centuries? Our shoshos, our gukas, let's ask them, let's have these conversations with them. And then instead of coming and changing, let's tap into that and only help them to amplify.
I like that. I like that very much. Let me shift the conversation a little bit. And Anita, your community is the community that you come from is a pastoralist community. We're starting to see a trend across Africa, particularly where climate change and even climate change solutions are starting to fuel conflict. For example, conflict over natural resources like water, conflict over pasture. Can you help us understand from where you sit, what does the situation look like from your community?
I can say the situation is really not good. You saw that on the road to COP27, there was a lot of pictures sharing of how climate change is affecting some communities, they say, in Africa. And most of these pictures came from the same community. As much as we had rains, the rains were not enough. Then this is where now we start seeing the nexus between climate and other issues like gender, education, where, for example, I run a foundation that helps to bridge the inequalities when it comes to access to quality education. But then you realize most of the times we are addressing challenges such as water shortages. And in a school, for example, that we've adopted in Kajiado West, the number of children has never been consistent in school. So because others have to move with their parents from one place to another, the girls have to stay at home, there's the issue of sanitation and hygiene due to lack of water and so many other challenges that is now leaving the community behind when other communities are moving ahead in so many things. And also when you look at human-wildlife conflicts, which is something that is currently on the rise, you realize that the animals are coming out of their homes, the parks, the elephants, for example, coming out attacking children, like you saw the baby that was killed by an elephant. Right. And I don't think for a community then you'll be able to speak to them about climate when to them they will just want to kill the elephant, and that leads to also another problem, which is biodiversity loss and all that. So I can say the situation is not really, really good on the ground.
Right. I want, ladies, I want us to do something. For the next few minutes, I want you to paint a picture of what the ideal would be. Talk to me about the ideal response to this, the wish list. Give me your wish list. Who wants to go first? You want to go first. All right. So Anita, you prepare your wish list. I mean, the things that, if you had to give a speech to the whole world and the speech that everyone will have to implement everything, think of 3 things that are on your wish list that you want to see, the world would like to see. Start with you.
Nature-based solutions. for me, if we go that route, if we implement nature-based solutions, and by nature-based solutions, I mean strategies and initiatives, projects that, you know, have an impact not just on people, but also on the environment, on the ecosystem in general. We are talking about reforestation. We are talking about, and you know, reforestation also, we need to kind of create a very big mindset change. We keep talking about tree planting, but can we move to tree growing? Because
I like that. Yeah. Say that again.
Exactly. Let's move from tree planting to tree growing.
So nature-based solutions.
Solutions, yeah.
Number 2.
And be accountable to reporting and being honest with ourselves. If we plant 10 trees, the most natural thing to happen is that about 5 to 6 of them are going to die. And so if we track this kind and report and be accountable, not to just say in
fluff up the numbers,
fluff out just to look good and say we lost this, and so let's, you know, roll down the next activity to make sure that we cover the deficit. And this way we kind of implement in a way that we are not just looking to look good, but to actually do what is right, to do what is right for our planet, for our ecosystem. How about, you know, going in restoration direction? Mm-hmm. Those dry lands, mangrove forests, and all those restoration. And I borrowed a lot from Rwanda in terms of implementation of nature-based
They're doing
solutions.
better than us
in terms of implementation, definitely so.
On our own policies?
Yeah, and also in policies. So nature-based solutions for me is the ideal world, because then we look at the end of the day, it's not just the environment that is happy, the communities are happy, the government is happy because their policies are working, the private sector is happy because their businesses are thriving.
Happy.
Exactly.
Anita, your ideal world. Paint a picture for us. They said we are borrowing the world. The leaders keep saying we're borrowing the world from future generations and young people. As a young person yourself, talk to me about the ideal world.
I think for me, I have 2 points. One will have to come down to the leaders. Like, we want to see them being genuine about climate conversations through the actions and the intentionality as well. And that has to come now through meaningful engagement of the communities, like we mentioned, and also meaningful engagement of the youth. I am speaking for the youth because I understand the youth have a stake when it comes to the health of our planet. But then, like our former Minister for Environment once told us, that the challenge we have is that when youths are involved, it's symbolic and episodic, where it's not really meaningful. We just engage to tick the box. And I think that also happens at the community level, where we just want to show that we are at the community, but it is not meaningful.
I see.
Yes.
I see. Ladies, I appreciate you for your insight. Like we said, it's a big conversation, but I appreciate that the 3 of us have made a few blows at this big giant that we're facing. I have some takeaways. Nature-based solutions and honesty in terms of reporting and implementation, right? And for you, basically put your money where your mouth is and involve the communities, involve the youth in a meaningful way. Yes. And not, what do you say, episodic?
Episodic and symbolic.
Goodness.
Yes.
Right. I promised you at the beginning of this that we'll get some insight from this. I really sincerely hope that you've learned something from our dear guests tonight. My name is Victor Moyakane. I'd like to call it a night on Insight Tonight, as well as the Daily Report. Join me again next Tuesday and on Thursday as we look at this subject from another angle. Our guests will probably join us once more. Yeah, please.
Definitely.
Yeah, come over when we ask.
Sure.
Thank you so much.
Still a lot more.
Have a good evening, and may God bless you.